Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. John Gross, and welcome to the fourth video in this GIS lecture series looking at what GIS is. So in this video, what I want to do is I want to take a minute to talk about why GIS is helpful. And this is going to be more of a sort of discussion of different use cases that really highlight what GIS can do in various applications. So if we think about what GIS is, right, both from the hardware perspective as well as from the science perspective, that it is a way of being able to take in spatial data, which we talked about as being sort of any information that has an explicit location. And it allows us and it provides tools to us to look at and analyze that spatial data to hopefully produce new information out of that existing data. And so I always like to say this, and hopefully it's not being overstated or understated here, that there really is almost no part of your everyday life that is not made better with GIS. So some good examples that I like to give of why GIS is useful. At the most basic level, think about your smartphone or your car's integrated GPS system. Right now, GPS means something specific. It means global positioning system, and we're going to talk a lot more about that in a separate video. But when we use GPS in terms of the way that we think about it with our smartphone or our car, we aren't thinking about it in terms of the hardware of the actual GPS side of it. We're using it more in the concept of navigation and the way that we can use that technology to get from the point that we're at now to the place that we want to go. And the way that we are able to navigate all of those routes, right, that's all done through GIS. It's taking in the raw inputs of GPSs and addresses through GPS and geocoding, and it's using GIS algorithms and spatial data in the form of road networks to be able to generate routes that are efficient. And depending on parameters that are put in place behind the scenes, they might be, maybe you can prioritize certain types of road types to avoid. For example, you can avoid tolls, you can avoid highways, right? There are all these different filters that you can use. But just think about how much different your life would be if the navigation aspect on your smartphone in your car wasn't available to you, right? That's sort of the most everyday mundane example, right? Another example is the check-in functionality that comes with a lot of different social media platforms, right? Facebook, Foursquare, etc. Right? When you click that little button, right, they're leveraging the power of GPS and GIS to take your location from your GPS enabled device and then broadcast that out to everybody that you're connected to, right? So some more sort of practical examples would be medical services, right? How do they navigate and route their ambulances, cop cars, etc., right? That's the same process that we talked about with the navigation for you and your smart car. Let's talk about businesses though. Right, let's say that you are opening a new franchise and of a popular restaurant company, and you want to figure out what the best location would be to place that new franchise. With GIS, you can actually bring in things like layers talking about demographic data. You can bring in a layer talking about economic data. You can bring in a layer of existing stores with a similar market to see where they are. You can run analyses to compare those three layers to come up with ideas. Okay, well, this is an area that has money that is not currently being served by other competitors in the same market. That might be a good place to place a store. Then you can bring in road network and say, okay, well, where are the actual physical infrastructure that I can place my store on? And you can bring in parcel data to figure out, okay, well, what actual individual pieces of land are available, right? Now, you certainly can do all of this with non-GIS means, but GIS just makes it so much easier and visual to combine all those layers together. Right. Another popular example would be talking about modeling environmental changes, right? One of the sort of data models when it comes to spatial data, we'll talk more about this in a future video, is what's called the raster data model. Long story short, it takes the surface that is being analyzed, breaks it up into regular patterned grids, and assigns each grid cell a number that represents the whatever you're studying in that particular area. And what we can do is we can take those gridded data structures and we can run them through models to see how different things change over time. So environmental modeling is a huge application of GIS. There are entire textbooks written to examining the environment with GIS. Crime and crime analysis, right? Crime mapping. That's another huge application of where GIS is helpful, right? You can imagine how useful it would be to be able to visualize where crimes are occurring across an entire area. On top of that, again, being able to bring in things like demographic data to see if there's a link between socioeconomic status and the number of crimes being committed. Or maybe you might want to be able to break that data down and look at it over time, which is something you can do with GIS. You can see, okay, well, how is the distributions of crimes changing between morning, afternoon, evening, and twilight, right? And maybe you see that, hey, crime sort of follows a trend along a subway line, for example. Or maybe you might see, hey, crime moves with this group of people as they migrate throughout the day, which might be an indication that, hey, there's a sort of profile of areas where you might need to increase or decrease the amount of law enforcement, right? I think at least in 2022, right, a very relevant example is going to be how we're able to track and monitor the spread of diseases. So if you are familiar with the Johns Hopkins COVID map, right, that was created explicitly with the GIS. In fact, it's watermarked on the map, that you're able to look at how and where data is occurring in near real time, right? You can see, well, they don't allow you to, but on the back end, right, there are individual data points that represent individual cases that you can then look at how those cases and move over time to get a feel for where is the virus headed, where has it been, and maybe you can see patterns of, how do we need to prioritize, public health resources in different areas. And maybe you can use that as a means to get ahead or try to get ahead of the spread to say, okay, well, it's heading, in this general north-south direction or south-north direction. Maybe we should prioritize resources here and here to help, bolster public health. So again, those are just some examples of what GIS is useful for in the real world. I will be including links for some use cases so you can actually see real life examples of these things being implemented. And as always, if you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you.